My name is Clara Vance, and I am 34 years old. Right now, a prominent tech investor is standing near my mother's dining table holding a crystal glass, delivering a speech meant for my brother's engagement that has morphed into my personal interrogation. He just paused directly beside my seat, and every conversation inside the room abruptly slammed shut. Moments earlier, he was discussing family and integrity, explaining how trust forms the bedrock of everything. My mother was beaming. My brother was smiling broadly. His fiancée gazed at him like he created the stars. Now, the investor stares down at me and states, in a commanding boardroom tone echoing into the kitchen, "I must say, I am shocked to find you here." His eyes remain entirely still. They stay fiercely glued to mine. Then he poses the single question that tears my family narrative to shreds. Who exactly are you to these people? The room goes cold. Silverware halts midair. Even the atmosphere seems suspended in tension. My mother releases a shrill chuckle and attempts to interject with a rehearsed excuse about me being the daughter who handles basic clerical tasks up in the city. But the investor refuses to acknowledge her. He continues observing me like he already possesses the truth and merely wishes to see if I might lie. Under his scrutiny, my mind darts back to yesterday morning when my phone illuminated on my bedside table, and my father ordered, "Tomorrow, you may attend dinner with your brother's future in-laws, but keep your mouth completely shut." My mother's tone pierced through the background. Her father is a major investor. Do not humiliate us the way you usually do. I simply agreed and believed I could shrink myself for a single evening. Now, the exact billionaire they desperately wanted to charm is awaiting my response. And I realize whatever words leave my mouth next will either sustain their fragile illusions or incinerate them utterly. Before I reveal his next words, and what unfolded after my departure, tell me what time it is for you currently, and where are you listening from? I am quite curious to discover how far this tale will spread. To comprehend how I became the daughter my own parents feared claiming in front of an executive, you must understand the hallway test. That is what I named it internally at 8 years old, standing inside our parlor in Oak Haven, Oregon, glaring at the console table near the stairs. There were 6 framed portraits resting there. 5 featured my younger brother at various ages wearing different uniforms. Little League basketball, school theater production, birthday celebration with a cake-covered smile, and exactly one of me. An awkward class portrait where my glasses were entirely too large for my face. My image was wedged behind a heavy decorative vase and a synthetic fern. You had to tilt sideways and stretch your neck simply to spot my eyes. That afternoon, I pulled a heavy stool over, stepped up, and shifted my own frame away from the plastic leaves. I placed it perfectly centered between 2 pictures of my brother. Then I stepped down and waited. The following evening, when I returned from classes, the stool was tucked away, and my portrait was hidden behind the fern again. That constituted the very first hallway test. Following that incident, I ceased moving the frame and began pushing myself instead. Each time my mother minimized me, I elevated the stakes. Whenever my brother joined the varsity squad, I convinced myself that securing perfect grades might move my photo away from the plant. Whenever he scored a crucial winning goal, I resolved that becoming class president might compel my mother to boast about me to absolutely anyone. Instead, I graduated near the top of my cohort, and my mother missed the presentation to sit on wooden bleachers, watching my brother sit as an alternate during a local tournament. She telephoned afterward and mentioned they nearly let him play, treating that detail like the ultimate victory. I accepted my full scholarship to Stanford, loaded my belongings into a battered sedan, and drove 5 hours to Seattle with my father's rigid embrace lingering on my skin. and my mother's final warning echoing nearby: do not develop a complex about your origins. During university, I developed a passion for code and data, addicted to the thrill of exposing digital secrets that powerful individuals wanted permanently buried. I morphed into the student who lingered inside the computer labs until 3 overnight tracking anomalies for investigations nobody cared about until they crashed major servers. Post-graduation, I fought my way into a junior role at a Seattle cybersecurity firm, grabbing coffee and running diagnostics for senior analysts until leadership finally allowed me to pursue my own audit regarding a corporation leaking consumer financial data. That investigation triggered federal audits and massive penalties alongside a reluctant nod of approval from my director. I dialed my mother that evening, overflowing with excitement. She interrupted before I completed my opening sentence and questioned if I knew how many points my brother scored during his amateur basketball match. I continued attempting the hallway test from afar. Every rank increase, every certification, every salary bump. I assumed she might finally notice me and perhaps place my photo where visitors could genuinely spot it. Instead, she informed the neighbors I had abandoned my studies because the urban lifestyle proved overwhelming and that I simply held a basic desk job to survive. She never specified the company because remaining ambiguous allowed her to twist the narrative however she desired. I discovered this during one holiday meal, sitting near the stove pouring tea while the neighbor casually asked my mother if I still battled severe anxiety issues. I had never received any medical diagnosis. My mother merely raised her gaze dramatically and murmured that I was incredibly secretive, and we avoided discussing the matter. I aggressively wiped the same counter stain for 3 unbroken minutes to prevent myself from shouting aloud. Instead, I continued traveling back for celebrations, maintained my weekly Sunday calls, and mailed greeting cards containing heartfelt notes my mother entirely ignored. I remained the daughter, running the hallway test with my entire existence, praying I would eventually visit and find my portrait displayed prominently, wishing maternal love might eventually eclipse the fiction my mother preferred. Let me describe my brother and the fairy tale my mother constructed around him like a museum display. My brother Leo is 4 years my junior. Wide grin, relaxed chuckle, the exact type of person strangers label a fantastic guy. After a brief 5-minute interaction, he repairs cracked phone screens at a retail kiosk near the highway outside Portland. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that profession. It is completely honest labor. Yet, through my mother's translation, his job transforms into something completely different. Listening to her version, he serves as a senior regional developer for a massive tech conglomerate on the brink of a major corporate promotion. She informs the local knitting club that he supervises countless employees and travels extensively for industry summits. My personal favorite occurred when she convinced her garden society he finalized a massive software contract with the local government. I solely learned this information because a club member messaged me online expressing how incredibly proud I must feel regarding my brilliant younger sibling. Meanwhile, Leo still resides 10 minutes from our family home, reports to a shift manager, and regularly texts me asking if anyone wants a refurbished tablet. The initial time I witnessed my mother exaggerate his title directly in front of me, I chuckled, assuming it was heavy sarcasm. Mother, that is definitely not his position, as he simply fixes hardware. She glared fiercely and declared it sounded much better her way, questioning why I perpetually acted so pessimistic. Gradually, I realized her primary concern had nothing to do with objective truth. It solely revolved around optics, and 0 aspects of my actual life matched the flawless aesthetic she wished to project. I possess neither a spouse nor children. I occupy a modest studio apartment downtown, accompanied by a struggling houseplant and scattered hard drives covering my kitchen island. My career as an ethical hacker requires exhausting shifts, endless digital tracing, and digging into the specific types of corruption polite society actively ignores. There exists no method to spin my reality into a narrative, highlighting a flawless suburban matriarch. Consequently, she fabricated an entirely different reality. She created a social media profile that essentially functioned as a shrine to her golden boy. Endless pictures showing Leo wearing a blazer at a local tech convention, Leo gripping a generic employee recognition certificate, Leo flipping steaks on the patio grill alongside paragraphs praising his tireless leadership skills. I browsed through 2 years of uploads one evening, sitting alone indoors, after submitting a massive report detailing fraud within a major banking institution. I had recently received notification that my cybersecurity audits were nominated for an elite industry accolade. My actual name never appeared once across her entire feed, not even casually mentioned during a holiday update, only my shoulder carelessly cropped out of the frame occasionally. Driven by a foolish impulse, I liked a specific upload and commented how wonderful it was seeing him thrive. She completely erased my comment within 60 minutes. I only discovered this deletion because I returned during a moment of deep insecurity and found my words missing. It felt exactly as if I attempted stepping into the frame, only for her to forcefully shove me aside. Last winter, my firm authorized me to investigate a massive string of data ransoms paralyzing local hospitals. I dedicated 8 months analyzing server logs, encrypted communications, and hidden financial ledgers. I attended every session of a federal hearing where compromised clinics sued the negligent software vendors. The lead expert witness consulting on that litigation was the exact same investor who would later occupy my mother's dining room. Back then, he remained a sharply dressed authority figure dominating the witness stand, yet he clearly noticed me. He observed me tracking internet protocols, watching me linger near the exits, interviewing the frantic hospital administrators. Following the settlement, he delivered a keynote address at a tech summit, and my supervisor assigned me to attend. Once the auditorium emptied, he halted my exit and stated, "Miss Vance, your forensic analysis was the most meticulous auditing I have ever witnessed regarding this crisis. It requires immense bravery to expose a broken system so brilliantly to the public." Then he firmly shook my hand and departed. I stood, completely frozen, clutching my laptop like a lifeline, desperately wishing to call my mother and explain that a billionaire visionary just praised my technical expertise. I refrained. "The previous time I attempted explaining a major breakthrough," she replied, saying nobody cared to hear about such depressing digital crimes. Regardless, did I mention Leo might receive a corporate vehicle soon? Therefore, I buried that massive compliment inside the same hidden vault where I stored every victory she refused to acknowledge, never anticipating that this elite investor and my toxic family would eventually collide around a single dinner table. The fateful call arrived late Thursday evening, or technically Friday morning, as my screen flashed at 2 o'clock and I immediately assumed someone had passed away. Nobody dials during those dark hours bearing positive updates. I groggily lifted the device and registered my father's contact profile. His outgoing calls remain incredibly rare even during normal daylight hours. During that pitch-black hour, it genuinely felt like a severe medical emergency. "Dad, what exactly is happening? And is everybody safe?" I shot upright so violently my pulse was instantly racing. His voice echoed low and cautious, sounding as if he was reciting a teleprompter and feared making a critical mistake. "Clara, Your brother and his fiancé are hosting her parents for a formal dinner this weekend, and your mother insists you can attend. Can. Absolutely not should. Never that we actively want your presence. I breathed heavily and attempted to regulate my surging adrenaline. Understood. I can easily manage the drive right after my shift. Then, hovering in the background, I caught my mother's harsh tone piercing through the tiny speaker. Did you inform her yet? My father nervously cleared his throat. Your mother needs you to comprehend several strict conditions. Her father is a massive tech investor. This represents a huge milestone for Leo. We desperately need to cast a flawless impression. My mother's voice suddenly hijacked the line completely. Clara, you may visit, but you must remain entirely silent regarding your actual profession. Do you hear me clearly? I glared at the shadows above me, hoping they might grant me infinite patience. Why must I? Because this gathering revolves around your sibling, not your ego. You possess that strange computer obsession, and your hacking stories deeply unsettle normal individuals. I absolutely refuse to host that energy at my dinner table. Simply claim you perform basic data entry in Seattle. Do not elaborate further. You know exactly how you behave. I understood perfectly how I supposedly behaved. I was the child accused of causing a massive scene whenever I achieved anything that could not be instantly weaponized to praise my brother. Even during my youth, causing a scene simply meant speaking too passionately about the science encyclopedia I was studying. I ground my teeth together so intensely my jaw ached. Mother, my profession is not some terrible scandal. It represents my entire livelihood. It defines my adult life. She scoffed as though I had delivered a highly offensive punchline. You constantly insist on making everything painfully difficult. Do not bring us shame in front of highly influential guests. Do you honestly believe they want to hear about scary cyber threats from the downtown area? There the truth stood entirely naked. Not that she felt genuine pride, but struggled expressing it, but rather she felt profound shame and demanded absolute concealment. I could have loudly protested. I could have yelled that this highly important executive had personally commended my incredible technical discoveries. I could have stated that I am 34 years old and refuse to fabricate details about my existence. Therefore, you can continue pretending I am significantly less successful than reality proves. Instead, I remained motionless in bed, with upcoming project deadlines haunting my thoughts, and quietly muttered my agreement. My father exhaled a massive sigh of relief and whispered that they would see me this weekend, acting like he had successfully diffused a ticking explosive. Once the connection dropped, I shifted onto my spine and studied the tiny fracture running across my plaster ceiling. The hallway test had tracked me entirely across the state, and I was perpetually failing the invisible criteria. Saturday, I departed the tech firm slightly ahead of schedule, swapping my standard hoodie and security lanyard for tailored trousers, a silk shirt, and the structured jacket I wore while accepting my cybersecurity innovator trophy. I had not originally intended to dress up. I grabbed the garments purely out of muscle memory. Yet, while slipping my wrists through the cuffs, I recognized exactly why the choice felt appropriate. This outfit served as my personal armor, a silent confirmation that regardless of whatever fiction my mother pushed inside her residence, I firmly knew my own identity. The journey from Seattle down to Oak Haven takes approximately 5 hours if highway conditions remain favorable. Pine forests, fading advertisements, isolated gas stations, and endless stretches of asphalt looking incredibly bleak. Typically, I survive the commute relying upon audiobooks and heavy espresso. That afternoon, I traveled in total silence, mentally replaying decades of tiny revisions and blatant falsehoods. The instance a relative expressed pity that my computer phase never materialized right after I achieved senior architect status. The moment my grandmother gripped my wrist during Easter dinner, whispering that my mother claimed I was mentally deteriorating, but they were actively praying for my recovery. Treating my financial independence and thriving career like a curable disease that might vanish if I simply returned home to operate a cash register. Midway through the trip, I parked beside a fuel pump and examined my reflection against the tinted glass while the meter ran. Sharp jawline inherited from my dad, my mother's piercing green eyes, the formal jacket resting against my frame like a hidden weapon. I attempted visualizing marching directly into their foyer and loudly declaring my absolute refusal to participate. Then I remembered my brother's innocent giggles from countless childhood summers when I tutored him while he played video games nearby. And I reasoned that this was simply one peaceful meal and nothing more. I could easily suppress my pride for a few hours just to ensure his happiness. What I failed to comprehend then was that my hidden reality would not remain buried much longer. I parked inside my parents' gravel driveway, a full hour before any expected arrivals. The property appeared completely unchanged from my high school years. Identical paint, identical porch swing, identical floral arrangements, my mother meticulously rotated quarterly like theatrical props. She pulled the front door open before my knuckles grazed the wood, hair aggressively styled, makeup impeccably applied, vision instantly sweeping over my outfit to determine if my appearance aligned with her fabricated script. "You arrived too early," she noted, lacking any basic greeting or physical embrace. "Enter quickly because we must review several vital details." She paced across the dining room like a choreographer, establishing positions, pointing sharply toward cushions, goblets, and silverware. "The bride sits here. Her parents occupy those seats. Your brother takes the head position, and I remain here. You belong over in that far corner." She gestured toward the distant edge of the mahogany table, where a lonely placard bearing my name rested far away from the focal point. I nearly chuckled aloud because, naturally, even the seating arrangement physically marginalized my existence. "Mother," I protested gently, "are you genuinely planning to present me as a low-level administrative drone?" She aggressively smoothed a perfectly folded linen napkin and muttered that I was acting incredibly theatrical. "Nobody present actually cares about your daily activities. They simply require confirmation that you are currently employed. Your sibling is the person establishing a prosperous lineage today. Stop actively complicating a straightforward evening." Inside the den, my father occupied his leather armchair gripping a magazine, his vision permanently affixed to the automotive pages, hoping that by avoiding eye contact, he might escape getting drafted into another domestic conflict. I recalled being 9 and questioning him why my mother perpetually ignored my advanced math medals. He had tapped my shoulder without breaking visual contact with the television screen and advised me to just let her ramble excitedly. Half a minute later, she paraded inside and initiated another lengthy speech, highlighting my brother's athletic potential. And that painful flashback superimposed itself over my current reality seamlessly. The front chime echoed loudly and jolted the entire household into immediate theatrical mode. My brother's fiancée entered the hallway first. Chloe, radiant and approachable, possessing an incredibly genuine smile that instantly lowers your defensive walls. She embraced my mother enthusiastically, pecked my brother's jawline, then pivoted toward my direction with an extended palm. "You are clearly Clara. Leo talks about You currently reside up in Seattle, correct? What exactly is your profession up there? For a fleeting, electrifying moment, the honest answer danced upon my lips. The undeniable truth, the high-stakes network breaches, the exhaustive overnight security sweeps. Before my jaw could even unhinge, my mother seemingly teleported directly against my shoulder, her sharp fingernails scraping my bicep hard enough to deliver a painful warning. Clara merely handles data entry for a tiny startup downtown, she declared quickly. Nothing remotely fascinating. Now please show me that gorgeous diamond. She linked her arm forcefully through Chloe's and guided her toward the dining area, her tone morphing into pure syrup while praising the standard engagement band. Chloe glanced backward over her shoulder briefly, her gaze analyzing me as if detecting the obvious friction between my mother's description and my confident demeanor. The secondary chime rang precisely on schedule. My brother instantly corrected his posture. My mother adjusted her collar and yanked the heavy door open, displaying a dazzling smile strictly reserved for wealthy strangers. Inside stepped the billionaire investor alongside his elegant wife. He appeared significantly taller than he looked during the legal hearings. Graying temples, calculating eyes. His partner, Evelyn, exuded the steady aura of a woman accustomed to high society galas who maintained her fiercely independent intellect. My mother immediately initiated aggressive handshakes and overwhelming flattery. We are profoundly honored to host you today. Please enter. Welcome to our humble residence. Here is our incredible son, Leo. She rested both palms atop my brother's suit jacket as though displaying a championship trophy. Leo grasped the investor's hand, utilizing that effortless charisma he always possessed naturally. I observed the CEO, silently analyzing him, remaining courteous yet entirely unreadable. Then my mother swiveled toward my corner, her vocal register dropping slightly. Breezier rushed, and standing here is our daughter Clara. She files paperwork at a small Seattle business, staying occupied but dodging any real stress. The executive accepted my outstretched hand, his grip solid, his stare fixing onto my features and lingering for a noticeably extended moment. Vance, he murmured slowly. Clara Vance. There sparked the exact recognition I witnessed back inside the corporate tribunal, the subtle narrowing of his eyebrows occurring whenever present evidence conflicts with his mental archives. My mother chuckled excessively loud. They endured a massively exhausting commute today. Let us direct everybody toward the dining spread. She physically interrupted our handshake by pushing him gently toward the main room. But while walking away, he threw another sharp glance backward, not mimicking a polite stranger trying to place a vaguely familiar barista, but behaving like an analyst actively scanning a secure database. The meal commenced under my mother's tyrannical social control. She distributed sparkling water, passed warm rolls, and recited a continuous monologue regarding my brother's entirely fabricated corporate conquests. She constantly boasts about the massive client portfolios he single-handedly manages. My father remained completely mute from his distant seat. He merely occupied the furthest dining chair and focused entirely upon slicing the roasted chicken. Whenever I attempted speaking, even offering harmless praise like complimenting the vinaigrette or praising the tender meat, she immediately assigned me a menial chore to banish me from the area. Clara, fetch more. Ice cubes, immediately. Clara, go monitor the oven temperature. Clara, march into the kitchen and verify if the dessert plates are clean. The CEO silently documented every single interaction. His partner monitored the bizarre dynamic even more intensely. I spotted Evelyn tracking how aggressively my mother deflected any polite inquiries aimed toward my end of the table. When Chloe kindly attempted engaging me by asking if I enjoyed the urban lifestyle, I started explaining how much I adored Seattle's tech district. And my mother practically shouted over my sentence, asking if they knew Leo was flying to Austin for a major developer convention. My syllables perished in my throat. The investor's eyes narrowed a microscopic fraction. Evelyn placed her silverware against the porcelain with a deliberate click. The superficial dinner chatter continued, but the underlying atmospheric pressure had fundamentally shifted. I sensed the change. Through the precise way the executive's subtle questions began targeting me directly, and how my mother's artificial giggles grew increasingly strained while she desperately blocked his inquiries. The entire evening morphed into a horrific psychological examination featuring live spectators. The ultimate climax arrived when the CEO raised his goblet and struck the rim using a butter knife. The sharp chime instantly silenced my mother's ongoing fiction regarding Leo's quarterly projections and commanded everyone's absolute attention. "If you permit me," he announced, "I wish to share a brief thought." My mother physically vibrated with glee. The moment was what she had been desperately engineering since finalizing the guest list. "Absolutely," she cooed. "We feel truly privileged." He rose smoothly, fastened his tailored suit jacket, using that instinctual motion typical of powerful leaders, and initiated a monologue concerning heritage, integrity, and the deep trust required when merging two distinct bloodlines. He addressed Chloe directly, first, praising her innate ability to judge character accurately, calling it a rare superpower. Then he shifted toward my sibling, stating that he valued secondary evaluations just as highly as initial encounters. This specific gathering was designed to facilitate total transparency between our camps. My brother beamed brightly as if he had flawlessly aced a final exam. My mother's fingers aggressively locked onto my father's wrist beneath the tablecloth. He remained entirely stiff, allowing her to crush his knuckles as she typically did whenever demanding silent backup. Subsequently, the executive commenced strolling casually around the perimeter of the dining chairs while speaking, a lingering mannerism from his corporate boardroom presentations, addressing the shareholders while locking eyes with every individual present. Upon reaching my isolated corner, he halted abruptly, pivoted his entire body toward my chair, and allowed the heavy silence to drag until every single guest was staring at me. "I must say," he reiterated, and this time he intentionally let his syllables hang heavy in the air, "I am thoroughly shocked to find you here." My mother instantly intervened, using her overly cheerful tone. "Oh, Clara remains incredibly shy, but she is absolutely delighted for her brother. We are universally overjoyed tonight." He completely ignored her desperate interjection. His piercing stare remained locked directly upon my face. "Who exactly are you to these people?" he inquired, lacking malice but radiating the clinical curiosity of an investigator possessing the core facts and offering me the opportunity to supply the missing context. My pulse hammered violently against my sternum. For one agonizing second, I debated executing my mother's strict commands, acting invisible, forcing a fake smile, reciting the pathetic data entry script, and letting the dangerous moment evaporate. But I vividly recalled the distinct respect coating his voice when he called me Miss Vance outside that corporate auditorium months prior, recalled the massive stack of elite security protocols bearing my signature currently securing national infrastructure, remembered exactly how my true identity had been systematically scrubbed from my mother's public existence, and I clearly heard myself state, "I am their biological daughter and Leo's older sister. Furthermore, I am a senior lead cybersecurity architect operating out of Seattle." The ensuing silence carried a vastly different density than any standard dinner party lull. It felt suffocating, explosive. My mother's heavy chair scraped aggressively backward against the hardwood floor, Honestly, she chuckled nervously, Clara dabbles in basic computer repairs, but she mostly just files invoices all day long. The CEO slowly rotated his neck toward her, his facial features entirely deadpan in a manner communicating pure disgust. Miss Vance, he addressed me directly. Your forensic audit, dismantling the regional healthcare ransomware syndicate, remains the most brilliant technical operation I have witnessed during my entire career. Your encryption algorithms were actively deployed across 3 major hospital networks I currently fund. I literally watched my mother's arrogant facade shatter like stepping through frozen lake ice. Evelyn gasped loudly. Chloe stared wildly back and forth between her father and me. My husband was informed. Your oldest child handled basic secretarial duties, Evelyn stated deliberately, her tone dangerously frigid. Nobody mentioned anything regarding high-level cyber intelligence operations. My mother violently mangled her linen napkin. I simply wished to avoid causing a massive distraction, she stammered defensively. Clara naturally hates drawing focus. I hated putting unnecessary pressure on her shoulders. Chloe rotated her entire torso toward my stunned brother. Is this factual? She demanded. You deliberately hid that your sister was the famous Clara Vance, whose security modules we studied during my software engineering seminars. She created the exact firewall patches my entire graduate class practically worships today. My brother gulped loudly, his cheeks burning crimson. Mom desperately wanted to avoid family drama, he mumbled weakly. His excuse sounded incredibly pathetic. The tech billionaire glared directly at him. Drama occurs whenever cowards fabricate reality and subsequently drown in the resulting fallout, young man. This situation simply represents objective truth. He aggressively shifted his focus back down the long table. And since we are actively clarifying professional titles tonight, what precisely is your actual role at the retail kiosk, Leo? My brother blinked rapidly, genuinely terrified. I work in technology, distribution. He lied again. My mother practically lunged across the placemats. He operates as a regional manager, basically a senior executive director. The corporate board completely relies upon his genius, she shrieked, praying that sheer vocal volume might miraculously manifest reality. My brother simply stared at his uneaten food. Tell everyone the truth, Chloe ordered softly. State the exact job title printed across your biweekly pay stub. Every single muscle controlling my mother's expression locked entirely solid. Leo, she hissed venomously, do not behave like an ungrateful child. The investor elevated one open palm, executing that subtle, authoritative gesture capable of instantly silencing chaotic boardrooms. Allow the adult male to answer the question, he commanded coldly. My brother exhaled sharply like a prisoner finally dropping an impossibly heavy boulder. I am merely a floor technician, he confessed quietly. I possess zero managerial authority over anyone. The only thing I actively direct is where angry customers sign their repair waivers. The dining room plunged into an atmosphere significantly thicker than before. Chloe pushed her heavy chair backward, slowly, dropping her napkin with chilling precision. I require fresh oxygen immediately, she announced. My brother desperately grabbed for her wrist. Chloe, please wait. This entire situation means absolutely nothing. Mother simply prefers framing our lives nicely for outsiders. She aggressively yanked her arm away. Prefers framing things nicely, she echoed sharply, or enjoys aggressively rewriting fundamental reality, because a massive distinction exists between those two concepts. And if you willingly stood idle while she erased your brilliant sister and blatantly lied to my family regarding both your lives, I must seriously evaluate what that reveals about your core character. Chloe, my mother interrupted frantically, fake tears finally surfacing. I merely acted exactly like any loving mother would. I desperately wanted your wealthy family to view us flawlessly. Evelyn finally stood upright, her wooden chair loudly scraping the floorboards. Absolutely not, she countered. A normal parent might exaggerate mildly. A standard mother might polish an unimpressive detail slightly. But what you orchestrated was intentionally deleting one extraordinary child to falsely elevate a mediocre one before commanding her to actively participate in her own erasure. That behavior does not resemble maternal love. That represents pure sociopathic control. My father abruptly spoke aloud, his vocal cords sounding rusty from disuse. The woman is entirely correct, he whispered hoarsely. Every single person snapped their attention toward him, as though a decorative lamp had suddenly begun delivering speeches. Martha, he addressed my mother directly. You pushed your delusions vastly too far tonight. Heavy tears actively cascaded down my mother's flushed cheeks now, some tears acting as pure manipulation, others springing from genuine terror at losing the fake narrative she worshipped for decades. I orchestrated this entire facade for your benefit, Leo, she wailed, loudly. I just wanted you to secure incredible financial opportunities. What prominent dynasty wants to marry into a trashy family where the rebellious daughter causes public scandals and the lazy son fixes broken cell phones? Chloe released a strangled noise resembling a mixture between a harsh laugh and a painful sob. You honestly assumed a billionaire and a surgeon could not tolerate knowing. Your brilliant daughter protects national security while your son works a basic, honest retail shift? She asked incredulously. The executive reached deep inside his tailored jacket and extracted a premium business card. He marched the short distance toward my marginalized corner and gently deposited the card beside my water glass. Whenever you desire elite funding or a senior board position at my firm, Miss Vance, he stated clearly, you possess my direct contact information. During that exact second, my mother's entire artificial universe permanently shattered. The powerful VIP she desperately sacrificed everything to impress was ignoring her precious golden boy and her expensive floral arrangements. He solely focused upon the discarded daughter she had tirelessly pretended possessed absolutely zero value. Chloe stood tall, furiously wiped her damp eyelashes, and glared downward at my brother. I refuse to marry into this toxic dynamic under these conditions, she declared firmly. Not unless massive, fundamental changes occur immediately. I am formally canceling our upcoming wedding. She forcefully yanked the diamond off her finger and placed it directly atop the silk table, Runner resting before his plate. My mother's hysterical scream instantly sliced through the quiet room. You absolutely cannot destroy his life, she shrieked hysterically. You cannot ruin his entire future simply because his jealous sister demanded a tiny sliver of the spotlight. I rose gracefully from my seat, depositing my linen napkin beside my china plate, displaying absolute calmness. I never desired your pathetic spotlight, I corrected her firmly. I merely wanted a legitimate chair at my own family's table where I was not forced to lie regarding my core identity. The CEO and Evelyn swiftly marched toward the front entryway. Chloe followed closely behind, pausing briefly near the threshold, simply to lock eyes with me. Thank you profoundly for finally exposing the truth, she whispered. My brother stared directly at me, his expression looking entirely feral. You literally just destroyed my entire life, he accused violently, his tone shattering. False, I retorted coldly. I simply refused to continue assisting our mother in destroying my sanity. Then I finally confronted my mother. I still care for you, but tonight concludes the era of me shrinking myself so you can pretend to feel gigantic. If you ever desire my presence again, it must solely feature my genuine self. Never again as some pathetic, muted shadow you deem socially acceptable. She physically recoiled as if my sentences delivered actual blunt force trauma. My father shamefully bowed his head toward his lap. The investor graciously held the heavy door open for his wife and his former prospective daughter-in-law, while I calmly grabbed my tailored blazer off the wooden chair and marched out of my childhood residence without waiting for anyone to shout my name. The long highway drive back to Seattle that evening featured an incredibly bizarre brand of total quiet, not that hollow deadness I typically experienced following horrible holiday gatherings where I smiled forcefully, swallowed abuse, and commuted home nursing severe migraines. This felt identical to the settling dust following a toxic skyscraper's controlled demolition. You can easily visualize the horrible structure that previously occupied the lot, but the surrounding atmosphere breathes infinitely cleaner, without its oppressive shadow. My fingers actively trembled against the leather steering wheel immediately after merging onto the dark interstate. All that suppressed survival energy I locked away during the disaster finally received permission to flood through my nervous system freely. I completely ignored the car stereo. I obsessively analyzed every single shattered moment instead. The sheer awe spreading across Chloe's face upon discovering my true identity. The specific manner the billionaire's tone remained, utterly calm, yet ruthlessly immovable. The distinct fracture splitting my father's voice when he ultimately confronted my mother regarding her psychotic boundaries. I parked inside my secure garage shortly before midnight, secured the vehicle, and hauled my luggage upstairs without ever glancing at my silenced phone. The device remained face down atop my kitchen island until dawn, when strong caffeine and morning sunlight made confronting the screen feel reasonably safe. 14 unread notifications illuminated the glass display. My mother sent a panicked barrage of texts late last night. You completely sabotaged your brother's entire future. Chloe permanently departed with her family. That billionaire will forever blacklist our family now. I sincerely hope that precious computer job keeps you comfortably warm whenever you die entirely alone. My brother sent significantly more erratic messages. Why could you not simply pretend you pushed papers in some cubicle? It was literally just a single evening. Mom has been sobbing hysterically for hours. Then arrived a final, nasty jab that hurt far worse than I preferred, admitting, you selfishly demand turning absolutely everything into a spotlight for yourself. Dad transmitted exactly one message around sunrise. I am incredibly sorry, Clara. That brief apology constituted his entire text. 4 words significantly exceeding any emotional support he ever offered verbally in person. Finally, there sat an unknown contact utilizing a familiar area code from my rural hometown. Hello, Clara. This is Chloe. I am deeply apologetic regarding yesterday's nightmare. I possess zero knowledge regarding the vile lies your mother fed my parents concerning your life. If you remain open to it, I would truly love grabbing coffee whenever I travel back up north. I desperately want to hear your unfiltered story without anyone aggressively editing your truth. I examined that specific text the absolute longest. Something tight inside, my rib cage finally relaxing for the very first time in years. We eventually met 3 weeks later inside a quiet bistro near my corporate headquarters. She arrived wearing faded denim and an oversized sweater with her hair sloppily tied up, appearing vastly more like a relaxed college student than the rigid aristocrat from the horrible dinner. Thank you for agreeing to chat, she whispered, fingers tightly gripping her warm mug. My mother explicitly told your parents that I was entirely psychotic. Did you realize that detail? I asked bluntly without any polite preamble. She visibly winced in pain. She heavily implied you suffered severe mental issues and remained intentionally estranged from everyone. She claimed the massive city corrupted your mind and advised it was vastly safer, avoiding any serious conversations around your presence. My dad genuinely anticipated encountering a fragile lunatic sitting at that dining table. Instead, he recognized the brilliant architect whose algorithms he constantly forced his top executives to study. Leo pathetically confessed later that he fully enabled those sick lies, perhaps not every specific detail, but definitely the overarching narrative. He casually dismissed the abuse as merely being how your mother naturally operates. I allowed her words to settle heavily between us. That exact excuse, I stated firmly, is exactly how horrific abuse remains permanently glued within sick families for countless generations. That is just how they naturally operate. It remains the most fundamentally destructive excuse in human history. Chloe nodded slowly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I am certainly not declaring Leo a complete monster, she clarified, but he willingly allowed your mother to use him as an abusive shield for decades, and he remained completely comfortable letting you pay his emotional debts. I bluntly asked if she considered the engagement permanently terminated. She stared sadly down toward her bare fingers. I promised him I might reconsider everything if he actively pursued serious personal growth, intensive therapy, massive boundaries, fully acknowledging his cowardly complicity, she listed clearly. However, I explicitly swore I will never marry that man unless he learns to defy his mother without constantly demanding you sacrifice your dignity to protect him. Approximately 4 weeks later, he directly phoned me himself. Tone incredibly raw. I recently started professional therapy, he admitted quietly. I honestly have absolutely zero idea what I am doing, but I recognize I can no longer pretend Mom acts harmlessly. He tearfully apologized not via a rehearsed monologue, but through horribly messy, fractured sentences. For chuckling whenever she aggressively dismissed my technological achievements, for intentionally hiding the truth from his future wife, for stupidly standing beside that table, directing more fury toward me than toward the wicked lies that successfully detonated his entire future. My mother predictably executed her standard initial strategy. She deployed absolute silence. For nearly 2 entire months, I received 0 guilt-tripping voicemails, 0 passive-aggressive family chat updates, simply a sprawling dead silence radiating from Oakhaven that I never caused and for once failed to feel like emotional punishment. It essentially felt like a corrupted server forced to crash and forcefully reboot itself. The initial breach in her silent treatment arrived via a tiny digital message. I deeply miss you. Lacking any cruel accusations, entirely lacking hidden traps. I waited 24 hours before finally replying. I definitely miss you as well. However, I absolutely refuse to re-enter your home bound by your toxic old laws. If you genuinely want my presence there, you must welcome your daughter, the elite engineer. Never the pathetic imaginary secretary you invented. She avoided answering my conditions immediately. During her hesitation, my normal life progressed beautifully. I successfully cracked another massive data syndicate. I actually attended dinner at the billionaire's estate alongside Evelyn when they graciously invited me for what they dubbed an honest family meal. Chloe happily attended that gathering as well, not dragging my brother as a prop, but simply attending as an independent friend. We all sat around a circular patio table featuring 0 head chairs, completely lacking assigned seating cards. Evelyn passed me the roasted vegetables and randomly stated, "Clara, inside these walls you never need to pretend being anybody except your brilliant self." That simple statement struck my heart vastly harder than any security clearance I ever achieved. A fundamentally basic declaration, feeling like the absolute antithesis of every exhausting hallway test I ever desperately ran. Roughly 4 months post-explosion, My mother shockingly phoned me one random Wednesday afternoon while I sat at my monitors reviewing raw code. I stared blankly at her caller profile as it vibrated, ultimately choosing to answer, "Hello, Mother." A tremendously long exhale followed, then emerged an impossibly tiny voice. Had never previously heard from her throat. "I genuinely have absolutely no idea how to apologize properly," she whimpered. "But your father strongly suggested I should attempt starting with bare truth." I desperately needed that evening to make us appear like an elite family worthy of wealthy alliances, and I remained deeply terrified that if those billionaires discovered your intense reality, they would severely judge our bizarre family dynamic. My crippling insecurities manifested incredibly abusively. I remained completely silent, forcing her to wallow inside her confession. Eventually, she whispered, "I am profoundly sorry for lying about your entire existence. I am horribly sorry for demanding you constantly hide your light. I completely fail to understand your highly technical world, but I absolutely should have asked you to teach me, rather than aggressively pretending your achievements meant absolutely nothing. It definitely was not the massive public begging some wounded fragment of my soul secretly desired. Not her standing before her snobby garden club, confessing her sins aloud, but it represented a visible crack within a concrete dam I assumed would eternally remain unbroken. I calmly informed her I refused to ever accept being minimized again, but assuming you remain genuinely willing to learn an entirely new method of parenting, I feel willing to attempt reconciliation. Several weeks following that call, I drove back down to Oak Haven for the exact first instance since that apocalyptic evening. Lacking any massive holiday gathering, simply visiting on a random sunny weekend. My father greeted me beside the driveway and dragged me into an incredibly awkward hug, lasting vastly longer than his typical embraces. Stepping inside the foyer, the immediate detail I spotted was the hallway table. 6 identical frames remained present, but this time my awkward adolescent portrait sat nowhere near the plastic fern. It sat proudly, front and perfectly, centered directly beside Leo's most recent headshot. The synthetic plant rested entirely, shoved aside, looking slightly crooked, as if my mother completely forgot how to style an environment without hiding me. I stood frozen, staring at that incredibly minor adjustment, and realized this tiny visual confession represented the closest she could possibly come to standing before an executive, admitting profound failure. Later that evening, eating pasta around the kitchen island, she awkwardly asked, "So, how exactly does a major security audit transition from a random suspicion into a federal investigation?" It seemed a fundamentally basic inquiry, the exact, lazy, conversational filler any normal parent might ask during supper. For me personally, it truly felt exactly like a massive vault unlocking. I answered gently, piece by piece. And she actively listened without derailing the subject, without immediately redirecting praise toward Leo, without treating my elite career like an adorable little phase. Here remains the ultimate lesson I desperately want you to absorb from my nightmare. If you ever occupied a chair where your own blood relatives treated you like disposable background extras during their personal vanity project, recognize that any affection demanding your shrinkage never constitutes real love. It merely constitutes toxic ego management. If toxic relatives require you to aggressively lie regarding your identity simply so they avoid feeling inferior, they absolutely are not protecting you. They simply protect the pathetic fictional narrative they constructed around themselves. The terrible evening that billionaire stood glaring downward and demanded to know my genuine relationship to my own relatives, I assumed I would permanently lose my entire family if I dared answering truthfully. What I miraculously lost instead was merely the pathetic role she forced me to play, the disposable, silent daughter eternally muted, ensuring the golden child could effortlessly shine. Toxic family roles can absolutely be rejected. Healthy boundaries are absolutely not brick walls, but rather heavy doors. And you alone hold the sole authority determining exactly who gets to walk through them. If you find yourself sitting at any table right now where the mandatory price of admission involves hacking away massive chunks of your soul, strictly ask yourself who falsely taught you that was the price of love, and deeply question whether those abusers actually deserve holding that much destructive power over your spirit. And assuming you possessed enough courage to scream just one sentence directly at the vile person who intentionally tried destroying your light, what exactly would those words be? I sincerely pray you physically write that sentence down somewhere soon, even if your abusers never hear it aloud, because the very first person requiring permanent proof that you are completely done shrinking is simply you.